Welcome to the Criminal Imagination. This series is not a tale of logic and reason. It is a descent into shadows, secrets, and the crimes that refuse to die. We will uncover the forgotten roots of crime fiction, haunted mansions, unreliable confessions, spectral witnesses, and guilty minds fractured by mirrors and blood. And through this, we will explore how fear, guilt, madness, and supernatural shaped the genre we believed we understood. This is the archive of the repressed. Welcome to Gothic Evidence Dark Inheritance, a world where justice limps behind secrets, where madness wears a velvet coat, and the blood on the floor tells stories older than law or even time. Today, let's enter the Abbey, not in the daylight, not in the neat historical constructions that scholars sometimes prepare for tourists, but in the hour where the shadows are longer than the walls themselves, where the arches seem to whisper, and where the silence is not empty but saturated with secrets. This is Blood in the Abbey. The Gothic crime story has always been about spaces like this, stone sanctuaries where murder hides behind or beneath prayer, where faith and fear twist together until they are indistinguishable. Today, we descend into what I will call the criminal priesthood, where the abbey is less a house of God than a theater of guilt, ritual, and blood. To speak of religious Gothic crime is to step into a paradox. The Church promises salvation, yet it is the same cloister that conceals heresy, poison, forbidden texts, and corpses. The Abbey has its own laws, its own punishments, its own silences. It is both sanctuary and crime scene. George Bernanos, in The Diary of a Country Priest and later in The Abbot's See, understood this terrible intimacy between the sacred and the criminal. His priests are not just men of God, they are men of sickness, temptation, and unbearable conscience. In The Abbot's See, the clerical figure is trapped by codes he cannot live up to, his faith curdling into doubt, his rituals becoming unbearable weights. Bernanos once wrote, "The wish to pray is a prayer in itself. God can ask no more than that of us." Yet, in his Gothic register, that wish is haunted. When prayer falters, when ritual becomes performance, sin creeps in, and murder follows close behind. Umberto echoes the name of the rose, of course, is the great labyrinth of his theme, a crime novel hidden inside a medieval monastery, where the pursuit of knowledge itself is criminalized, and where heresy becomes indistinguishable from inquiry. Brother William of Baskerville arrives not as a pious devotee but as a logician. Yet, even his logic is swallowed by the abbey's Gothic atmosphere. Its walls dripping with suspicion, its library a prison of secrets. In Echo's world, every sermon might conceal poison, every book might kill, and every ritual might be a mask for blood. The motive of sacred murder is not incidental. In both Bernanos and Echo, the crime is not outside the abbey but produced by it. Heresy is not just doctrinal deviation, it is a form of criminality, punishable not by courts of reason but by fire and silence. In the name of the rose, Jorge of Burgos insists, laughter kills fear, and without fear there cannot be faith. That is the theology of terror. Preserve fear at all costs. even if it means murdering those who dare to laugh, dare to read, dare to think. Crime here is not a violation of divine law, but its enforcer. Notice how Gothic crime reconfigures law itself. In the secular world, crime is defined by state codes: murder, theft, fraud. In the abbey, crime is defined by heresy, deviation, disobedience. To steal a book is worse than to kill a man. To question a sermon is worse than to blaspheme. This is what makes religious Gothic so disturbing. It reveals how law itself can be sacred, arbitrary, and absolute, and how punishment can masquerade as salvation. The figure of the monk becomes central here. The monk is bound by vows, by silence, by ritual gestures repeated endlessly, and yet within him lies the storm of temptation. Bernanos priests often collapse under the burden of their conscience, while Eco's monks erupt into jealousy, greed, and secret lust. The Gothic abbey is not populated by serene, holy men, but by guilty minds, fractured mirrors of belief and doubt. Now, let us linger on one of Eco's most terrifying motifs, the poisoned book. In The Name of the Rose, the ultimate murder weapon is not a dagger, not a rope, not a vial of poison administered in wine, but the pages of a forbidden text, dusted with poison so that the act of reading itself becomes lethal. Knowledge kills, literally. Reading is a crime punished by death, and the library becomes both a reliquary and a trap. The abbey, which ought to preserve wisdom, becomes instead a tomb of secrets. Here the Gothic merges crime with epistemology. Who has the right to know, and who must die for it? In the abbey, truth is guarded, not because it saves, but because it threatens the power of those who speak in God's name. Now compare this to Bernanos. He is less baroque than Eco, less labyrinthine, but no less haunting. In the Abbot See, guilt is not located in hidden libraries, but in the human soul. His priests are not murdered by others, but devoured by themselves, rotting under the weight of their own sin. He writes, "Hell is not to love anymore." In that line, you hear the crime of the abbey not as external violence, but as the slow extinction of compassion, the drying up of love in a place devoted to charity. This is Gothic at its most internal, the crime that takes place not in the cloister, but in the conscience. It is important to note how these Gothic texts turn religion into a spectacle. The abbey is full of rituals, vespers, chants, masses that are supposed to elevate. Yet in Gothic crime, these rituals are transformed into masks, into rehearsed performances behind which something monstrous waits. The chant hides a scream, the prayer hides a curse, the altar hides blood. Eco makes this literal with his grotesque deaths in the abbey. Monks found drowned, poisoned, torn by visions. Bernanos makes it psychological. The ritual is observed, but its meaning hollowed, until the priest himself is nothing but a hollow vessel. Heresy itself becomes criminal theatre. Think of the inquisitions in The Name of the Rose. The accused are paraded, interrogated, tortured into confession, their very speech turned into evidence of their crime. The Gothic loves this spectacle because it exposes the fragility of truth. What is heresy? It is whatever the abbey says it is. What is crime? Whatever threatens the order of the cloister. Thus, the law of God becomes indistinguishable from the violence of men. In both Bernanos and Echo, women are rare presences in these cloisters, but when they appear, they destabilize the entire order. In Echo's novel, the peasant girl represents desire that cannot be admitted, love that cannot be named, because to name her would be to acknowledge her humanity, her place in the abbey story. Bernanos too leaves women on the margins, but their absence is itself Gothic. The abbey as a self-enclosed male world, suspicious of desire, terrified of the body, desperate to preserve a purity that is impossible. And when purity fails, it fails violently. Religious Gothic also reveals how time itself changes within sacred walls. The abbey lives by bells, by prayers at fixed hours, by endless cycles. Echo's novel constantly returns to the rhythm of canonical hours, structuring the narrative like liturgy. But within that repetition, crime erupts. The bell rings, and instead of prayer, the monks gather around a corpse. This cyclical time, haunted by crime, suggests that sin is not an exception but a constant, always waiting beneath the rhythm of ritual. We might ask, why does Gothic crime return so obsessively to monks, rituals, and priesthoods? Perhaps because these figures embody the perfect tension between law and transgression. The priest is supposed to be the mediator of the sacred, the guarantor of morality. When he sins, it is not just personal failure but cosmic rupture. The abbey is supposed to be pure. When it conceals murder, the horror is double. Echo in this postscript to The Name of the Rose insisted that he wanted to write not a historical thriller, but a meditation on science, interpretation, and truth. Yet, what readers remember most are the corpses, the fire, the labyrinth, the suffocating fear of the abbey. That is the power of the Gothic. It insists that truth is never simply discovered by reason, but must be wrestled from darkness, from blood, from guilt. Bernanos too never wrote a detective story. Yet his novels are full of crime. The crime of despair, the crime of hypocrisy, the crime of silence. In these abbeys, the supernatural is never far. Not always literal ghost, but spectral presence of guilt. Voices in confessionals, shadows in cloisters. Echo toys with this constantly. Monks whisper that our apocalypse is at hand, that the murders are the sign of the beast, that the abbey itself is cursed. William of Baskerville tries to apply logic, but the Gothic atmosphere reduces him and refuses his clarity. Bernanos does the same, but inwardly. The priest cannot tell whether his thoughts are divine inspiration or demonic temptation. In the religious Gothic, the line between God and the devil is never stable. Every vision could be revelation or madness. There is also the motif of mirrors. In Echo's Abbey, the library is a mirror of the world, distorted, unreadable, full of traps. In Bernanos, the conscience itself is a mirror cracked by sin. The Gothic Abbey thrives on reflection, the sacred ritual that reflects demonic obsession, the monk who reflects the murderer, the book that reflects poison. Mirrors never clarify, they fracture, they multiply, they distort. If we step back, what do we learn about crime fiction from these religious Gothics? We learn that crime is not just legal violation but a spiritual rupture, that guilt can weigh heavier than evidence, that fear is not just of punishment but of damnation. And above all, we learn that law is never neutral. It can be divine, arbitrary, cruel, and that those who enforce it may be the greatest criminals of all. So the Abbey is not just a backdrop for Gothic crime fiction. It is a crucible where crime, faith, and fear melt into one another. Bernanos shows us the inner collapse of priesthood. Echo shows us the outer collapse of knowledge itself. Both remind us that behind the stone walls of prayer, blood always waits. And so let me leave you with a question. When we read these tales of monks and abbeys, do we see them as relics of the medieval past? Or do we still recognize them in the institutions around us today, where rituals hide secrets, where codes replace conscience, where law disguises violence? And finally, in the spirit of Gothic endings, I close with this. In the abbey's silence, we learn that guilt outlives prayer and that every sacred wall hides its crime. Until next time, walk carefully where the shadows fall. This has been the Criminal Imagination.